The button has been pushed. Hello and welcome. And I cannot tell you guys how excited I am for our guest this week because we have the Peter Rowan with us. So thank you. Thank you so much, Peter, for showing up. Shay was not able to be here. He is up in Steamboat for Winter Wondergrass. Um,
Uh-huh.
but we're super appreciative that you took the time. We only started this thing 6 months ago, and for me to be able to talk to a pillar in the community like yourself, a 2022 Bluegrass Hall of Fame induction, right? So like
Mm.
the people that you have played with spans the who's who of music, right? And so it is so special for you to take your time and chat with us, and we really appreciate that. And I just saw you recently. I actually saw you play twice last year when you came through Colorado with Sam Grisman. And I will say that your voice still sounds amazing. I've been blessed to see you over a dozen times at Telluride Bluegrass Festival, and you sound amazing, Peter. I don't know how you keep doing it.
Breathing.
Is that it? Do you not have any? Because like I was at the Billy Strings show backstage, and I saw like all the tinctures and teas and concoctions that they have on their little stand. Is it really just breathing that helps you keep in tune?
I would say that's primarily it, but to be quite honest, I do a lot of Buddhist mantras, and they are an invocation of the richness of our innate uh, awareness mind. You know, many different words for it, but basically, I guess it. You know, aspiration is like our aim, right? We aspire, and aspiration is all sort of connected with the breath. So mantra is a very interesting subject and has specific, uh, specific areas of awareness that are meant to be enhanced through different mantras, and I just employ those, and I don't really do them as a vocal exercise, although I have with friends over the years. There was a friend of mine named Ponderosa Pine, who he was a journalist named Keith Lampy, and he decided to give up everything for a pure life as a wandering seeker. And he never wore shoes after after that. And he used to write for Rolling Stone, and he used to write for the New York Times and stuff. But he felt that all of that was connected with a kind of the straight press in a way. They had their own agenda, and they weren't talking about what was really going on, which was the need for beings to become enlightened, the need for human beings to recover their basic nature. So the type of Buddhism that uses mantras a lot, I mean, they all do to some degree, is the path of mantra. So that's an invocation of states of mind that are beneficial to sentient beings, beneficial to uh, humans. And there's so much negativity that that's sort of been uh, my path, and I think because of that, and the fact that Bill Monroe was very strict in about how to sing bluegrass, but that has kept me. Uh, uh, my voice and my spirit alive, to have the technique from Bill Monroe, but the wisdom of the Buddhist path to be able to basically throw my voice out there, and let it be good. That's my motivation, and songs with words and songs with meaning, of course, it gives you a vehicle to do that. But even in any old bluegrass tune, you can put the hurt on it, as Frank Wakefield said. You can put the hurt on it, and give that high lonesome cry, and you'll be singing.
You've been known to, and that's I remember reading an article with you talking about the ism when you were talking about Buddhism, and you've been practicing for what, over 50 years, correct?
It's mounted up. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I've had started in my 20s, and so yeah, that's going on 60 years, I guess. I'm 82 years old, and Grisman's right behind me. Dog is just turning 80, I think. So
Yeah, and it's amazing what you guys have been able to accomplish in your life and what you continue to do. And it was so fun for me to go back and look at some of the history and like you're a cornerstone in like Americana and bluegrass music, right? But then you're from Massachusetts, correct? And
yeah,
you grew up in the Northeast?
yeah. I grew up a few miles from Walden Pond, and so the whole idea that Thoreau represented and uh, the ecological starting to have serious regard about how we take care of the earth. That all kind of came together in my lifetime. In my
How did you do it?
well, I was just born in this time. The 1942 in the 20th century, just when all the ecological concerns and back to nature movement and the whole 60s thing of back to the land, and Thoreau was one of the first people to kind of pull that off in a philosophical way. I mean, he didn't live too far from the town, and he could always go to his mother's house and have biscuits and gravy. But he lived out there in the woods, and I think that was an idea that we all shared, and probably still do share, is that we try and keep the connection to nature alive, right? Keep our own nature and the nature of the five elements, and trying to the climate now we see the climate change, and that it's a big topic again, but it started back there. So we were just born, we were baby boomers, we were born after the First World War, and all this stuff just started happening in our lifetime, and it gave us some focus. When I did my album Dust Bowl Children, I tried to address some of those things, and I'm we're never short of subject matter when you if you want to get into that.
No, you aren't, and there's so much passion behind it, and I'm truly interested to wonder what were some of your first musical influences as you were growing up, and this generation just started to blossom.
Well, my uncle came back from World War II. Uncle Jimmy, he was in his 20s, and I was about 4 years old, and he came back with a ukulele that he forever said that he
Oh,
had won in a poker game in Honolulu. And uh, first I heard him play as a very young child, about 4 or 5 years old, and he did all the classic stuff. You know, Ain't She Sweet, 5'2", and Bye Bye Blackbird, and want to go back to my little grass shack in Kealakekua, Hawaii. And so when I saw that, it just music. It awoke something in me when Jimmy played in our living room when he come back from the war. Might have had something to do with the fact that he had come back from the war. Of course, I didn't even know what a war was at that time, but he
but you
sang
know
for us, and
where you're from.
he brought grass skirts and things. We wore grass skirts and danced the hula around in the living room, I remember, and I was just always fascinated with the sound. And one of the things in New England at Christmas time during the years of great snowstorms was that people would go from house to house on Christmas and sing Christmas carols. And I just noticed that people were happier when they were singing, and singing for other people. Of course, had a little bit to do maybe with the punch bowl, but
But there was a lot of emotion attached to it. And hearing that story,
yeah,
that makes my heart sting because so my grandfather was stationed in Oahu during the Korean War. And so
yeah.
I'm from Hawaii. And
Oh,
and and so I actually really wanted to ask you about what inspired your My Aloha album. And
yeah,
now and it was obviously your uncle. So
yeah.
so how cool is that? So did you spend time? Did you have a place in Hawaii, or because like obviously all of us that follow you know that you can span so many genres and culture, and we love that about you. And then for you to see you in my own backyard, it was super super special. And then it was really fun because I started digging because I wanted to find out something, and I didn't hear the uncle story, but I did hear something about the Kentucky Waltz and Bill Monroe and
Oh
how
yeah,
he actually took that riff from Pualalia, which
yeah,
was a Hawaiian slack key song from
yeah,
1915.
yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit more about how you were inspired to do that and how some of this came about.
Well, I think Hawaiian music has just always sort of been there. I remember as a kid when I would take my dad's Philco radio and put it under the covers, um, and listen to Arthur Godfrey's show from the beach at Waikiki. And then there was also another radio show called Hawaii Calls. And this was the music that was on the radio that you
Yep.
could hear before there was rock and roll, before the rhythm and blues, began to change everything. And with like Big Mama Thornton, Hound Dog, and then Elvis doing Hound Dog, and the whole rock and roll thing that was my generation. Uh, the first thing you heard was Hawaiian music, and then way in the off in the distance, you could get WWVA West Virginia and hear country music. So those two are very related, especially with the steel guitar. And yeah, I heard a lot of Hawaiian music, and um, that's what was on the radio. Actually, it was one of the first things on the radio because the United States Army or Navy helped develop the microphones that came in around the time of Bing Crosby,
Oh wow, I
and
didn't know that.
allowed for a kind of a better broadcast. Some of the stuff from earlier on, the microphones weren't really high fidelity, and around I guess around the time of the World War II, I heard that, or just before then, I heard that Bing Crosby was the first voice that really could take advantage of the new low end on those microphones, broadcasting mics, right? But they were designed by Navy Navy people, engineers,
It's a
engineers.
lot of rain.
Yeah, bigger range, and actually had a lot to do with the first bluegrass records
Really?
because Bill Monroe took Flatt and Scruggs and Howard Watts and Chubby Wise, and they drove from Nashville on up to Chicago and recorded at a radio station there in the studio. That was the record that set the bar for bluegrass. Was recorded in a radio station because they had all the good gear. The studios didn't. There probably weren't very many studios. Although Jimmy Rogers had been recording at I think was it Columbia Studios in New York or RCA. But technology in those days was all analog, and they were trying to, all tube driven, create a create a sound that was a true sound, the sound of what we hear, rather than as just some, anything related to digital or AI that is now you know, coming in. But yeah, so all the U.S. Navy presence in Hawaii, they had access to good microphones. And when Arthur Godfrey, maybe people know who he was, but he played the uke, and he was a guy from the States, and he had the Arthur Godfrey Hour. It was kind of a talent show um, over here, but he had spent a lot of time in Hawaii. That was the party, the place where you went. Bing Crosby went there. Arthur Godfrey was there. It was like the explosion of the sort of kind of a Howley invasion, really.
Oh, it
Uh,
was. It was the exploitation of Hawaii, and it was a
no,
huge boom. And
absolutely.
the
But
the
Waikiki
tourism boom all came from that.
generated so much music. I
Yeah,
still go there. I still go to the Halekulani Hotel to hear my friend Doug Tolentino play with his group.
that's
Just a very traditional group.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
and you were talking about
it,
the emotions and the culture in Hawaii. It is such a cornerstone of who we are, right? And it's everywhere, but it's not the same as it is in the mainland because you're not having concerts, right? You're having backyard picks, or you're
right?
having a party, or you're at the beach, and so there's a much more spiritual and environmental connection, and so
Yeah, yeah,
that
I see it. Yeah, I can see a big connection there between that and bluegrass. And now I'll tell you a little story. You know, Bill Monroe always talked about this other music that he had. He says, "I
okay.
have this other," but he would not. He said he wouldn't play it because he would disappoint his fans. He's not like me. I'll just play it. I'll go out on a limb. He told me don't go out too far out on that limb. There's enough flowers out there already. But he saw me as who I am more than I saw myself. He said, if you can learn to play bluegrass, you can play any kind of music. And I just, that was, he could see that I was going to be in a generation that was, you know, maybe go beyond just, maybe be eclectic in the musical styles that could
And
come together. I have to say,
for
though, just make a,
Peter, for some of these young bucks that may not know, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys was the first band that you joined after high school, correct?
yeah, I tried college for a couple of years, and but I had a little rock and roll band around New England called the Cupids, and we concentrated mostly on kind of a rockabilly sound. But they also referred to Buddy Holly's music as Tex-Mex at the time. So
Okay.
we did a lot of Buddy Holly. Uh, we did some Gene Vincent. We did Elvis. We did some Chuck Berry. But also some Spanish through the way. There's a song called "Oh Donna" and "Come On, Let's Go." Richie Valens, Richie
Hmm.
Valenzuela, who when the tragic plane crash happened, and both Buddy Holly and Richie Valenzuela left the earth. That there's a song I think called "The Day the Music Died"
Yep.
that is about that. We lost something. We lost some innocence there, and let's face it, the whole last part of the 20th century was a loss of innocence. With assassinations of political leaders, and now we're seeing the result of that. This is the direct result of the flip side of the hopefulness of that time, but it was a whole lot more complicated politically than we understood. And now we're just finding out, all this stuff is coming out, all this knowledge about what really went down, and with the JFK. And have you heard that Dylan tune, "Murder Most Foul"?
Of course. I
Gosh, that
it
that just is unbelievable.
and for me, like I love lyrics, I love storytelling, I love the folk, right? So like I
Yeah,
something that you can connect to that can be so powerful, because music in a music community is already so powerful, but then when you have words and you're able to teach and create empathy and to challenge the status
yeah,
quo, right? It
right,
can
right,
transform.
right.
So it doesn't matter if it's 1940 or 2040, they're going to find a way to continue those conversations through music. And it is kind of eerie how some of these musicians can see it before it happens, right?
Well, Bill Monroe, it wasn't by accident. He wasn't just a lucky hillbilly, He had big ears, like Bob Marley. Bob Marley came over from Jamaica, lived here, took everything he could from the music at the time, everybody from Sly Stone to, uh, James Brown, and brought it into reggae music. Bill Monroe must have grown up hearing a lot of Hawaiian music because he was also on W. The barn dance out of Chicago, WLS barn dance, and there was a Hawaiian group on there. So I mean, Hawaiian music was part of the musical environment. But although he said he would love to have been able to make music, he said I would ask him. I'd say, well, would it have a mandolin? He'd say, well, it might have one of them little guitars. Yeah, a ukulele. He goes, I think that's what they call it. And I
Well,
asked him. I remember asking him if it would have a dobro, a slide guitar,
mhm.
and and he said no, it would have a regular guitar played with a slide. Which that's really interesting because that's the early stuff with Jimmy Rogers and his Jimmy Rogers band was the Hawaiian Entertainers, and they were one or two uh, Hawaiian musicians in his band, and he invented country music. So I mean that's what they say, you know. But his band was had Laney McIntyre, whose brother had the McIntyre Brothers swing band in Honolulu. And where are those studios now? Because I recorded my Aloha in a radio station. That was all that was available. There's no studios. What happened to the studios? It's not, you
I
know.
mean, what happened to Hawaii? Any locals say that we've been priced out of paradise, right? So it probably
Yeah.
just in California West, and somebody turned it into a nice condo.
Well,
um,
a lot of Hawaiian people go to Portland.
yes,
It's a
or,
big
or
area,
or the
and
Ninth
there's a
Island in
Hawaiian town
Australia.
up there. What's the name of that town?
I have not
In
been to Oregon, so I do not know. And I'm
Yeah.
from the Big Island, so we're the country boys. We're the Hicks, and so my daddy was like a Hank Williams, Dwight Yoakam country boy, and my mom was a deadhead hippie. So I I got the mix of both worlds, and that's why I love music. It doesn't matter what it is, and I do love the story behind a music, and kind of the storytelling and the power of it. And so, as a songwriter who has made such an impact with some of the songs that you've written, what was that process like for you? And did it evolve over time in how you write and what you're doing?
Yeah, I find songwriting to be a real light in my life, and uh, when I wrote those songs, I was, well, Panama Red, L.A. Cowboy. They all came from little adventures that I was on, and Land of the Navajo too was
You were
a
story.
3 day camp out in the desert and coming up with all that. Midnight Moonlight was at the end of Sea Train. I stayed on in San Antonio, and I came by that song pretty honestly.
And
In that,
didn't they not want to play it? C Train? They didn't feel
well,
that it was what they were
I had
doing.
written. They didn't want to do Panama Red, but
Oh,
we cut a demo of it. But they they didn't want to be too country.
okay.
Really, they wanted a very kind of classical sophistication, which they did. Um, and I was more the funkier element in the group. But I had to really learn to play electric guitar in a band setting that wasn't just me strumming behind a vocal, you know. And
Mhm.
for that, I'm truly grateful. They were a great bunch of people. And Richard Green was a bluegrass boy with me, and he was the fiddle player in C Train. So we were kind of somewhat of an electric bluegrass kind of band. And then we made Mule Skinner with Clarence White. So that put us directly into I mean, what were they calling the Sweethearts of the Rodeo? There was a country rock they were calling it. And New Riders recorded L.A. Cowboy and Panama Red. So there was this sort of country element that had come into pop music that was, maybe allowed more space for my type of songs to come in there. But a fan once told me that, that I had turned them on to desert music. I
Okay.
That's like amazing that they think I belong to this genre about the desert, but I can dig that, and it inspires me to think more about that. Really,
Well,
um,
I can definitely see that with some of the stuff that you've written in the past. So, like
well,
when
yeah, especially the Tex-Mex kind of stuff that's coming out soon. It it's the Mexican border. I mean, it is the Southwest. The desert and
and so
all that implies.
that's what we had talked a little bit before, and I asked like, hey, what kind of projects do you have going on? And you said that you have this new album coming out, correct? And so, did you write some originals for that? And how was the process of writing the music for that new album compared to some of the stuff that you had been doing in the past?
Um, I was able to get back into some of the groovier sounds using a drummer, like the drummer of the Tex Maniacs, Chris. he is so professional, uh, so in the groove, and Max Baca on bajo sexto, and the real genius of the group is uh, the accordion player, and Josh Baca, Max's cousin. Well, more complicated than that, but we'll leave it at that. But
So how did you find these guys?
no, it's that it's that I'm only I'm really I only do it from the point of view of affection. I mean, I'm really an aficionado. I'm almost really an amateur. I just do what makes me feel, and I try and do it in a way that reaches the audience and that they share that feeling with them. That's all my songs are, really, and they're personal explorations, and some of them are random, and some of them are more focused, and yeah, like
And so,
so.
so what is your current project? And then what you guys have an album that you're going to be releasing here soon?
What is that?
What is the current project that you guys, the Tex-Mex album? And
Well,
then,
it's finished. It's going to be released online. It's called Peter Rowan: Tales of the Free Mexican Air Force. Featuring Los Tex Maniacs.
and it's a full album.
Yeah, it's 18 songs.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
How long have you guys been working on it?
a couple of years.
I say you like to stay busy because we just interviewed a young man by the name of Wyatt Ellis a few weeks ago,
Sure.
and we had a great chat with him, and he is a phenomenal mandolin player, and we talked about actually a couple of songs that you recorded with him as well, and he was talking about how he had wrote this tune, and I believe he met you during your induction for the Hall of Fame, correct, in
He
2022.
Yeah, he was a student. Uh, he had been playing electric guitar, and during COVID, he started taking lessons on the mandolin. I mean, he lives in the South, so he knows bluegrass music,
Yep.
like Billy Strings. These guys have such big ears. They began so early in their lives. Playing electric guitar, playing acoustic guitar, playing banjo, whatever. Well, Wyatt began to take some lessons with Chris Henry, who has been in playing mandolin with me for a number of years now, as well as his own project. And he just Wyatt progressed so quickly on the mandolin, and that Chris wasn't able to make it to my Hall of Fame gig. And he said, "But Wyatt can do it." And I said, "Okay." So Wyatt was my mandolin player over in Raleigh for that weekend, and when we did the Walls of Time, which I wrote with Bill Monroe, when we did that song, he did the intro exactly like Bill Monroe. I mean, exactly, with the kind of a triplet and a syncopation. And Molly Tuttle and I sang it. That was super fun.
How
But Wyatt, his ear is exact. He's probably got perfect pitch, but we'll see. He's working on his own thing all the time. I I we've been just sending. We're trying to write a couple of things, but I believe that songs no tune before its time. It's like you may have to wait, and the song will
it
arrive.
will come?
You know.
And isn't that how the Winds of Rowan County came? Is he had sent you some of the music for it, and then he said that you ended up just writing these beautiful lyrics over the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's very traditional sounding, and I had a whole other story song that went with it about a guy on the run from the law and trying to get back to Roane County. Uh, but this one is a love song, and it is the perennial wanderer trying to get back to his Roane County bride. And yeah, I mean, co-writing like that is such a pleasure. You share some ideas and you come up with something that's like, yeah, yeah.
And how
He's
for you, for someone that was like taken on with Bill Monroe at a young age, for you to now help some of these young musicians as they transcend and acquiesce into this like universe that continues to evolve and change, right? Because Shay's not here, but the one question he wanted to ask was, what
Yeah.
was your perspective on where some of these new bluegrass sounds have gone from traditional, right? Whether it's like some of this psychedelic or this rapid grass or some of those things. And for someone like you, how do you see that evolution and what do you think of that sound?
Well, bluegrass is a band sound, and we've got any number of amazing players that can be combined in the studio now. And so the bluegrass is in a growth period, and the younger players, like Molly Tuttle and uh, Sarah
Sierra Furrow?
Sarah Farrell, who isn't particularly bluegrass, but all the people who play in her band are bluegrass. So I
Yeah.
mean, it bluegrass is a spring, a wellspring of musical. It just to be able to play bluegrass means you have to know your instrument, and you have to know about timing and the importance of how making room for other people in the arrangements. And there's a whole lot of musical ideas that can take place in that 4 or 5 piece bluegrass thing that isn't just about a performance. It's about finesse, musical finesse, and subtlety. And sometimes when it gets out in public, of course, it's like it's a party. Is the audience that wants to party, but for the musicians, they're all over, and in many country bands or bluegrass players. Um, uh, who's that guitarist? Guthrie Trapp, who's a
Mm.
wild Fender Telecaster player. He grew up playing bluegrass, and that's the way it is with a lot of people because it's easier to pick up an acoustic instrument and kind of you can get far into music without ever having to plug in or anything. And then if you want to plug in, you've got some backdrop, some background. And I have to say, Billy Strings and Wyatt, they listened as kids. They didn't have a prejudice of like you must only play bluegrass. So they learned,
Yep.
you know, Black Sabbath and I don't know why we haven't really talked about that, but I know he was playing electric guitar, shredding, and so they come from whereas we were in bluegrass and kind of going out into rock and roll or more rockin' sound. Uh, the younger players have already absorbed all that stuff and are coming into bluegrass along with and sometimes after having gotten some chops in more of a rock and roll you know song choices and things like that. But it's an appreciation of excellence, really. You got fiddle players like Chubby Wise and Richard Green, and yeah, and then you've got you know electric guitar players like Johnny Winter, and then you talk to those people and you find out they love bluegrass. It's just
Mhm.
not their career choice. So
No,
yeah,
but
it's all
foundational
intertwined.
in
Yes, you're
what
right. Foundation. Yeah.
what if you had to give, because there's like obviously with this younger, newer generation, they see some of these bigger names, but they don't know about the tradition, right? And some of the old school. So if you were to find a young fan in their 20s that's just starting to learn about this genre, what are some of the artists or albums that you would tell them that they should study and what they should go and listen to?
Well, that's easy. The Stanley Brothers, everything they ever did, you know,
That's
and Bill Monroe too. Bill Monroe and Jimmy Martin. Jimmy was really commercially
with our
successful.
foundational forefathers of bluegrass.
I would say, though, that generation, yeah. I mean, if you follow and listen to everything Bill Monroe has ever recorded, you'll hear uh, early versions of "In the Pines" and "Doghouse Blues." You start to hear the blues coming in, and then the Stanley Brothers picked up what Bill Monroe was doing, and they They took it further in their direction. And Carter Stanley was a great songwriter, and he was a bluegrass boy. He did go to
Mhm.
work for Bill and do some of Bill's coolest gospel tunes. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's the easy answer. And I'll say that after Old and in the Way, when I was out playing the up and down the East Coast with Tex Logan, Grateful Dead fans would come, young fans would come and tell me how great it was that Old and in the Way turned them on to the roots of bluegrass, and they went out and found it on their own. Well, it's like discovering a genre. It's like discovering the blues, you know. And I mean, I remember the first time I heard the Country Gentleman way back in the day. I just couldn't believe. I couldn't figure out how they could get that sound, and
Yeah.
everybody interweaving their parts and stuff, which is part of the art of bluegrass back in the day of one or two mics. And then I saw the Country Gentleman. I saw how they did it, and it was like an acoustic experience. Sometimes the bass player would stand closer to the guitar player, and the tones of the guitar would ricochet, off the bass, acoustic
Right from
bass.
the,
Right.
that's pretty
That kind of
cool.
thing doesn't happen anymore, but in a jam session it will.
Yeah,
But
but
that's how it was in those days. Yeah.
isn't that
So
why Sam Grisman and your current project where you guys are out playing Olden in the Way, you guys are just playing on a tin can mic, right? So that's pretty much as
it's hardly
acoustic
a
as
tin can.
that's
It's a very expensive tin
it,
can.
it is, and it sounds amazing, but all of you guys are unplugged, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
cool because like a lot of us know obviously um David Grisman and then Olden in the Way with Jerry Garcia, Vassar Clements, John Cotton, right? Like this was huge for a lot of people. And it's amazing because now there's an entirely new generation that's hearing you play those same Olden in the Way songs with the dog's son. So what has that kind of been like for you to like have been growing up with David, and now you're getting to go out on tour with his son.
Yeah. It's in a in a sense of like the continuity. It is a full circle. Um, and Sam is so much like his father. He's got that drive, that Grisman drive, and it's he is probably working more dates than anybody I know, and
Yeah,
that's hard to sustain. But if if you do it, you just keep going. There are results from that. There are results of musical cohesion from just constant playing. I mean, when I worked with David, we rehearsed every day. There wasn't a day that went by. We lived together. That we didn't play together.
David Grisman.
I met David
How are you
Grisman.
introduced to him?
No, where I met him was he had a band called the New York Ramblers, and I was on a search for the old time bluegrass sound, and I was down in North Carolina at a fiddle contest, a festival, uh, and David and his band showed up from New York. They had all driven down in some sedan, and Winnie Winston on banjo and Jim Fields on bass. And I remember I saw them pull up, and they opened those doors, and they all fell out like a thousand clowns in a little car. They'd been in that car a long time, and
A long drive.
so David and I. It was kind of like he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and it's like. And then we got together and played a little bit that weekend. So I think the seeds were planted then. That was uh boy, that was just after no, that was just 1968. Yeah, I just left Bill Monroe. That spring
Oh,
I was yeah.
and
Yeah,
then so
yeah.
when did you start? Because you started in a different band with David before you guys put together Olden in the Way, correct?
We had a band called Earth Opera.
Yeah.
Earth Opera was on Elektra Records, and we opened a lot for the Doors, and so we were into some dramatic stage antics. But it was fun. It was fun because the idea of bringing theater into a stage performance,
Yeah.
that's rock and roll, really. Jim was
Did
in good shape when
Morrison
what say that again?
that come from you guys watching Jim Morrison on stage?
I think partly, yeah. I mean, I didn't take Jim's approach, but it was like, well, you can have more fun with this than just standing around looking at your shoes and picking guitar.
Bill Monroe wasn't yelling at you to straighten up.
No, no. What do you call that number there?
And so how long did you guys play in Earth Opera? And then was Vassar or John part of that band? Or
Well,
and then I
we
would
would run into Vassar on the road. He was with John Hartford.
oh
Uh,
wow, okay.
he was out with John Hartford, and John had just come from the Glenn Campbell show and put out a record called "Steam Powered Aeroplane."
Yep, that's a
And
game
I mean,
changer.
the saint behind all of this the heavenly host here is John Hartford. I mean, really, he was John the Baptist of this whole thing. He was the first guy to go direct. I mean, unplug his fiddle, but have it connected through a remote device through the sound system, and he could walk out in the audience and dance with them and everything. And that was up at Telluride that he was. Telluride was sort of the real door opener for a lot of us, Sam Bush and myself, and Byron Berline, who was a fiddle player, he played with the Rolling Stones on that country honk. Um, um, yeah, it was the thing is that we were a certain age too. We were growing with the times, and it was like surfing. It was like the zeitgeist of the moment was all this stuff, and the wave came, and we just wanted to be on the wave. We wanted to be on the front edge of the wave, right in the middle of the trough.
Unlike today, the wave isn't on a phone, right? So you actually had to go out and see and talk to and connect with people and be in real life and create communities. And so Telluride kind of harbored a place where all of you that were looking for something could come and find somebody to connect and link up with.
Yeah, it was the biggest audience of that our age and younger in the country at the time. At the time of festivals, that was the biggest of the festivals, and I think they would do. I think they were starting to talk about 10,000 people a day, and that seems like a lot. And um, it's changed now, of course, but it's still an opportunity for. It still has that opportunity for young people to enter the contest. The other one was the Kerrville Folk Festival in Kerrville, Texas.
Mm.
Um, that Guy Clark and Towns Van Zandt and myself and Robert Earl Keen, that whole Texas Americana side of things had a real outlet there. I mean, because before that, I mean, even for Towns and Guy, it was the coffee houses,
Yeah.
and and then finally, after years of well, they had hit songs. Rodney Crowell produced "If I Could Just Get Off of This L.A. Freeway," and for uh, Guy Clark, and that was a moneymaker. That was a good one. And then Towns had "Poncho and Lefty" by Willie, and you know, uh, was a hit record in country music. Um, Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard. Uh, yeah, I think it was those two guys. So Towns had a big hit record, and so the Texas songwriting thing, and then began to really expand. And dear old Rod Kennedy was a champion of us singer songwriters of that ilk, the sort of what became Americana. Um, so yeah, I mean, I lived in Nashville in the '60s. I lived there again in the '80s, and in the '80s, both Guy Clark and Towns Van Zandt had moved to town from Texas, And in 1990, I moved to Texas, and
So
but
you're
we saw a lot of each other, and we did a lot of work. I moved to Texas because there was still a vestige of some of the old language and the older singer-songwriter inspiration there. You know, Willie Nelson, he was from there, and so many really great players. But I went back, you know, and even just a few years ago, there were people I never heard of who had their own festivals, and they were getting 20,000 people a day, you know. But when we were doing it, it was we relied on the grown-ups to book the gigs.
yeah,
You know, the grown-ups would put on the show, and we'd show up and we'd play, and that would to me was an inspiring mix of that whole Texas thing. Um, but you know, Bill Monroe did say he said don't go too far out on that limb. There's enough flowers out there already. Meaning, don't waste your talent on too many things. And so my I guess my forte as a bluegrass musician is contextual. You know, you need to have a bluegrass band. But I did a record called Dust Bowl Children,
hmm
and that was one of the first records to have be on the Americana uh, under the umbrella of the Americana song movement, which was a friend of mine's idea. How are you going to include this movement of songwriters and innovative lyricists who tell the story? Because as you were saying in the beginning, it's the story,
yeah,
and that's what I'm trying to write is the story of our world. And once there was an Americana category, Rob Bleetstein invented that. He was doing some publicity and broadcast stuff. I think he ended up working with Coldplay uh, as an archivist for some of their stuff. But he's one of the people behind the scenes that really kind of helped us all along by, you know, sort of showing where the stream was flowing, you know, call it Americana and instead of folk music, you know.
yeah,
I think the Americana theme is, although I don't feel tied to Americana as a theme, it's like I'm just an Americana person, you know, I live in America. And, but I've gotten a lot of inspiration from Irish music and uh, the whole song tradition that can tell the continuing story, you know, and so that's been a big influence on me. Cathal O'Connell of the Boys of the Loch took me aside one time and he said, "Now, Peter, when you sing the song Raglan Road, you've got to tell the people it's a bit of a poetical song." I said, "Okay, it's poetical, meaning shut up and listen."
yeah. Thank you. But that's what's so amazing about a lot of your music is you can tell that you truly care and you're not just singing, you're researching, right? And you're sharing some of these cultures and some of these aspects with us through this beautiful voice and music, right? And so that's why for me it's so fun. But what's crazy is like you transcend through so many different genres. Just in this conversation, we've talked about Tex-Mex, reggae, Americana, bluegrass, folk, right? Irish. What is it about you that challenges yourself? Because like a lot of people, they just find what they like and they stick to it. But I feel like you're constantly challenging yourself to go to these different corners and see, hey, what's in here, and what are you looking for, and what do you pick up while you go and do some of that research?
I think it it's partly a fault, as Jerry Douglas has said in this little film they did about me called "The Tao of Bluegrass." He said, As soon as I get just about there, perfect. It's like the next move is the big move in your career. I go somewhere else, and I don't know why. I'm born on the 4th of July, the year of the horse, and I just sometimes need to get out there and look around. Um,
You
but
just don't
really, it's just it's
nobody can corral you, is what you're saying.
yeah, I guess so. But it's the world we live in. It's the world, especially if you love music, you do go seek out. I was watching Billy Strings. I was so tickled watching Billy Strings on Rick Beato's broadcast today on YouTube. I just laughed because he's telling the tale of how it really is, and he's saying, when you get working like that and you get popular for one thing, you have to learn where your strength lies, but at the same time, it's like even Billy ends up digging the same ditch trying to find the pipe.
Yeah,
You know, it's like if you just keep doing what you do and never grow or never change, it gets to be really you start to lose your love for it. I think I have a love for the discovery of stuff, and I'm blessed, really blessed that I keep an open mind to. Well, it sounds like bragging, but I just keep an open mind um, uh, to the song. The poet Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet Seamus Heaney, said, "You can't go out and hunt down inspiration. You have to go and you have to hang out in the forest, and then maybe she comes by, and maybe she's the inspiration, the muse. He said you can't track it down and grab it. You just have to wait patiently.
it finds you.
It, the inspiration, you have to wait patiently for inspiration, and yes, it comes. I don't do any. I don't drink coffee or tea. Is about my vice these days. Um, I used to smoke a lot of pot, but I wasn't somebody who could do that all day long. I mean, quite honestly, I'd be stretched out, by 1 in the afternoon. It'd be like, that's the day, you
Yeah,
know, and like Panama Red. I was singing on the streets, and some jazz musicians who were nearby that I knew had their students at the Berkeley School of Music, and I always bought my herb from them. And they had things like purple pango and stuff like this. And one day I went up there and I bought this herb from them, and it was Panama Red. And I said, okay, and it was a completely different experience. Was very, it was a very relaxing kind of a buzz, physically very relaxing and not cloudy mentally at all. It was just almost just pure physical, and which allowed your mind to kind of enjoy itself, really, instead of like getting the mind hit where you're like, oh my God, how am I going to work my way out of this punch, this corner I painted myself into? But just what I'm saying is that well, I'll say one thing about Panama Red is it's the growing season. When it came from Panama in those days, the growing season was January to December.
mm.
So this herb was 10 or 11 months of maturing. And that made a huge difference. Now, who knows anymore? I mean, it's a whole other world and not one that I'm part of. Although, people still, crowds of folks love to catch a buzz and hear some music. And uh, but I'm not in that space. I some years ago, around really before Jerry Garcia died, I went. I I was quitting. I mean, but I was still like an intermittent puffer. And the day Jerry died, I just said, "Oh well, man," and of course I got way too stoned and I went out on the road and I lost all my stuff. I couldn't find my bags. I couldn't. It was like mental fog, and I
Beautiful.
realized that that era is open, closed. That era is gone. You know, it's over. And and I say this to young players is because, you know, if you're writing a song and you catch a buzz, you could find the muse, uh, and if you like try and overwork it and say this is the treasure, I found it, you might get a song, but you also might end up just in a dark place where that flash of inspiration dissolved itself.
Came and
And
went.
yeah,
It's been
so
really powerful with some of the musicians that I've spoken to, how many of them find sobriety, right? But I also think a lot of them, even with marijuana use or like the use of hallucinogenics like LSD and psilocybin with mushrooms, right? But you see some of these artists that create like these very trippy images, and you think, oh, they're going to be super messed up while they're creating this art. And it couldn't be further from the truth. They're stone cold sober, but what they're doing is pulling back from those memories of those experiences at the time and using that as a trajectory to where they're trying to go. But some people think that that's the world that they're in, and so that's where the world that they need to create from, if that makes sense.
yeah, well, I'm of the sort of ceremonial mind when it comes to things like peyote and things like that. And none of these things I seek out anymore, um, because when you study Buddhism with the masters, uh, there's a certain commitment in meditation to letting the mind rest,
Hmm.
you know, letting the mind rest. And when you can really rest your mind, you know, Leadbelly had the song, relax your mind, don't be in trouble all the time, relax your mind. You know, that's all we're trying to do really is relax enough to where some joy can bubble up. And it's the clarity of mind that has meant a lot to me. In terms of songwriting, especially, it's it's not quite as uh, easy to come up with, you know, the momentary inspiration. It's more of a long range thing. Like I've been lucky in the past couple of weeks, and I've got a lot of lyrics down, and I think I know what the melodies are. But it also came from finishing a memoir. You know what I mean? To suddenly have the mental space is not. I'm not thinking about writing about my life. I'm just letting the songs kind of play. You know, and that's what it is. It's play. You know, music. You play music. They call it play.
Well,
Yoo-hoo!
think the problem is for a lot of people that are using vices, right? It's to cover things up or to not feel something. And even somebody like Jerry and what he fought through so much, right? And covered up with his drug use, it ended up taking him away from everyone and him away from himself. And so I think that sobriety is something that's really truly powerful. And I know that you have talked in the past about your relationship with Baba Ram Dass, and I think that it's really powerful for people to understand that they can break the cycle, right? And they don't need to live this quote unquote lifestyle that they think they have to, that was done by the successful musicians or artists or whatever before them, right? And for
Yeah,
somebody as powerful as you to say like, hey, to be able to have a clear mind really allows you to continue to flourish as an artist decades later, right? Like,
yeah,
how special is that?
yeah. I would say the learning to the practice of meditation. I mean, you could be in the woods sitting on a rock, and your mind will relax. And you know, you could be in a living room or a Zen center in a cave in the Himalayas. You know, it's a challenge. It is a real challenge. But the Buddha pointed it out and said, you know, you can be victorious. live with the expanded mind of inspiration.
I think that we've done an amazing job. I can't thank you for your time, Peter. I know that people are going to be super excited. You have a ton of upcoming shows, right? So where can
Yeah.
they go to find out where they can see you? I know I will be seeing you in April in Colorado, in Fort Collins, and in I think you're playing at 10 Mile in Frisco. But I'll be seeing you in a few weeks. But where can some other people see where you're touring? What's
Well,
going
we coming up. We have we've been down in New Orleans the middle of March, and then over in Sewanee for the Roots Music Festival in Live Oak, Florida, and then I'll be at the Donkey Tail in Sisters, Texas. I think it's just down by Dripping Springs on the first weekend in March. Then I have another bunch of time off to get those songs together. It's been a
That's
pleasure, man. I'll see you
Thank you
soon.
so much, Peter. I look forward to it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And then can you just